First of all, compliance policies. A few things that we want to know about them before we sort of show you the actual portal itself. A policy basically defines your compliance standard. So we go into the policy, which we'll show you, and we say we must have BitLocker on our device. It must be this version of Windows. It must be run antivirus. If it isn't doing those things, it's not compliant. So that's what the policy does. It defines your compliance standard that you're going to sort of evaluate all of your devices against. A device can either be compliant or non-compliant. There's no in between. You know, it's either those are the two sort of statuses that a device will have. And we can apply compliance policies to Windows, iOS devices, and Android devices. And we can actually reference, as I mentioned previously, our compliance policies in conditional access policies. You know, so it's not just a case of knowing whether devices are compliant with our standard or not. We can actually use that information to control access to our tenant and our resources. And the other thing as well is that compliance. There's a compliance validity period that can be configured. So a device sort of can get a certain amount of grace period, basically, with compliance. You know, so once a device is compliant, that compliance can be valid for a certain amount of days, which is configurable depending on your requirements. But that can be literally 1 day, or it can literally be like 300 days. It depends on what you want that to be. So we're just going to jump into the actual Azure portal now, and just sort of quickly look through some of the actual settings in there. So the first thing I want to show you in the portal is what can we evaluate using compliance policies. So on the screen here, I've just got a policy up. It's basically like we're just going to go through the process of creating a Windows 10 policy. And you can see the different options there for different platforms. So we're just going to sort of, on this one, this is the one that I've done this morning. We're just going to sort of name the policy to something temporarily, and then we can go in and we can see what options we've got for compliance. So you can see we've got a few subheadings here. You run sort of custom scripts ourselves to sort of discover a particular attribute on the device and bring it back and use that in compliance. We've got some what I describe as device health attributes here. So we've got, for example, BitLocker there, so we can require BitLocker to make this device compliant, or these devices compliant. Just bear in mind that compliance devices don't change anything on the device, just evaluating the state of the device. So requiring BitLocker using a compliance policy won't enforce BitLocker. It will just use it as evaluation criteria to deem the device compliant or non-compliant. So we can use BitLocker, secure boot, code integrity. We can check for all of those things on here in a Windows 10 compliance policy. Got other properties, which is a really useful one. So you can use sort of Windows OS version to make sure that you might decide that that a certain OS version is your compliance standard, and any device that drops below that or is below that would be deemed non-compliant. Again, it makes sure that you can use that in conditional access, make sure devices that haven't got sort of a recent level of patching aren't accessing your resources because they're potentially vulnerable. So that's the device properties section. If you use configuration manager, you can require compliance on that as well. And you've got sort of system security that can enforce on laptops as well, instead of simple password, PIN code, what the maximum length of that PIN code or the minimum length of that PIN code is, what the complexity requirements are. If you use Defender for Endpoint, you can build in the risk score from Defender for Endpoint into this. So if the risk score is below a certain threshold, if you do use that, then it can deem that device non-compliant as well. And then you've got actions. So if a device is non-compliant, you can actually send out email templates to users. So for example, if a device isn't compliant, you can tell them to maybe run Windows updates. I can tell them to contact the IT help desk to get this looked at. You know, you can provide a little bit more information around the compliance, the reason for it, and give them some steps that they can actually follow, and how long they have basically to actually complete those steps. So it sort of gets to the point where the management of this, it becomes a lot more sort of self-governing really from the user's end, because they do have an incentive, because obviously especially if you're restricting access to resources to actually get these things complete, it's not just a task where the IT management team or the IT team are actually just chasing people to get things done, which have no sort of incentive to the user to actually move these things forward, to get devices up to date, to make sure they're secure. We can sort of drive a bit of an incentive around by using conditional access for those things to help the user sort of engage to get these things done. So that's the type of stuff we can evaluate using compliance policies. So if we've created a compliant policy, what I want to view now is how do we actually view non-compliant devices. Let us get that up now. So what we do, just go back there, is we click the policy that we just created, or the relevant policy. So this is our list of compliance policies here. So we're going to click into our Windows policy, and we're going to basically look to see what devices are compliant with that policy and which aren't. So we can see 10 devices in there, our test tenant. One of them's got an error and basically isn't compliant. So we can see we've got a device there with an error. We go in that device, take a look, and then we click on device compliance on the left, and we'll get a more sort of, we can see which policy it's failing on. We click into there, and we get a really sort of clear, specific breakdown of, because obviously a compliance policy is made up of many components or many checks. We can see very clearly what that device is failing on. So we can see this device hasn't actually got BitLocker enabled, which is why it's shown as non-compliant. Again, something like that being used in conditional access is very useful. So you haven't got encrypted devices accessing your tenant, or non-encrypted devices accessing your tenant, and data potentially being stolen from those devices. So it's very clear and easy to sort of see what that device is failing on from a compliance perspective. Another example that we've created is just to sort of show you the sort of possibilities with it, is we've created a policy where we basically enable real-time, or we check for real-time protection with Windows Defender. Or in this, so if you can see on the screen there now, we've got the compliance policy for Windows 10 up again, and all we're going to do here is we're just going to basically, if you can see there where it says real-time protection, you can see that we've configured that, and we're basically going to just enable that on this policy. And I actually disabled real-time protection on my laptop so that we can see exactly how that works from a compliance point of view. So basically, the next time the device checks in, Intune will check the device, see if it's compliant, and you'll see there my laptop there now, because it's got real-time protection disabled, has failed the compliance policy, and again it will tell you exactly why it's failed. So you can see no real-time protection enabled on the device because I went in and manually disabled it just to show here, but you can see it's very easy to sort of tell exactly what it's failing on. So that's a few examples of what we can do with Windows. There's a lot more in the compliance policies. I showed you a few things there, but I just want to sort of jump in now and just sort of show you what type of compliance options we've got on the iOS side of things. So I'm just going to sort of jump in and show you the iOS policy and what exactly we can check for, what we can do on those. So again, the compliance policies won't force settings, but they will prompt the user and guide them how to change those settings on the devices and ask them to change them, but it won't push settings. That's what configuration profiles would do. So as you can see on the screen, this is the compliance policy for an iPhone. So these are the options you've got. So all that would have to happen is the user would install the company portal app, and from that point on, once they log in with their Office 365 credentials, the device would be evaluated against this criteria. So we can check to see if the device is jailbroken. and because it's set to block there, if the device is jailbroken, it will be deemed as non-compliant. We can check the device needs a password to unlock the device, and we can use force it use simple. We can't force. Sorry, it's not forcing it to use simple passwords at this stage. We're evaluating it, and if it isn't using a simple password if it is using a simple password in this scenario, then we block it using conditional access. And we can check the minimum password length, the required password type for the user on that device to make it alphanumeric, numeric, include special characters, usual sort of stuff, but we can do all of that in here. We can set the maximum amount of time that the device is left without sort of it being locked before it prompts for a password. So we've just got that set to 1 minute on this policy there. So you can see we've got very sort of specific policies that we can set. And like I said before, these compliance policies would prompt the user that they can click in the company portal app. It'll prompt them to change these settings to match the compliance policies, but it won't actually force them onto the device. But if the user doesn't meet the requirements, then you can obviously block that device from accessing your company's tenant, your company's information. So, final thing on compliance policy, because I know I mentioned it a lot there, is conditional access, because it's such a sort of key part of compliance policies is hooking them into conditional access. I just sort of wanted to show you where you would go to do that. So once you've got a compliance policy you're happy with, if you go in to create a new conditional access policy in the Azure Portal, I'll show you where you actually configure the criteria to include compliance in your conditional access policy. So you've got a new policy here, and you basically just go to conditions on the left, and then select filter for devices. We obviously want to configure this. We can either include or exclude depending on how you configured your conditional access policies. And then this is the property we're looking for here. It's is the device compliant? Equals true. So if devices are compliant, we've now got criteria that we can use to either allow or block devices based on their compliance. So then we'd go to the access controls and say, yeah, device compliant, let's grant access to that device, or you can do it the other way as well. You can obviously block access for devices that aren't compliant. So yeah, although conditional access isn't the main part of this webinar, I just thought it's so useful if you are doing compliance policies to also use conditional access, just to show you where that criteria is and how you can use it.